My name is Eliana Chen Ward, 34 years old. If you had walked into my advanced English class that Tuesday morning of my senior year, you would have thought you were seeing the moment a dream was born, not the moment one died. Sunlight slanted in through the tall windows, dust floating lazily in the beams like unwritten words. Posters of classic novels lined the walls, all those names that once felt like distant stars: Austen, Baldwin, Morrison, King. I sat in the third row, right in the dead center, hands folded over my notebook, heart beating too fast for how ordinary the day looked. On my desk was the story that had cost me 3 weeks of sleep, a short piece about a girl who discovers her grandmother's hidden diary, and with it, a trail of family secrets that change how she sees everyone she loves. I had poured myself into it, obsessing over dialogue, rewriting scenes at 2 in the morning, hearing the characters talk to me even in chemistry class. I thought stupidly that maybe this was the story that would prove I belonged in this room. Mrs. Blackwood stood at the front of the class with a neat stack of printed pages in her hands, the red pen tucked behind her ear like a weapon disguised as stationery. She moved down the rows, dropping papers on desks with quick, efficient thuds. Occasionally, she paused to offer a tight nod or a small, satisfied smile. When she got to Trevor, the guy behind me who thought punctuation was optional and once spelled definitely with 3 F's, she stopped and actually beamed. "This," she said, lifting Trevor's story like it was a trophy, "is what I mean when I talk about voice. Original, entertaining, unexpected. Zombies playing basketball in space. Who would have thought?" Laughter rippled through the room. Trevor smirked. I smiled politely, but my throat was dry. I waited for her to place my story in front of me, to hand me some kind of verdict: good, bad, salvageable, something. Instead, she stopped at my desk and didn't let go of the pages. Her fingers tightened around my story like it was something she needed to crush first. I saw it then, the margins nearly bleeding with red ink, lines slashed through sentences I'd labored over, words circled and stabbed with comments: unrealistic, cliché, poor dialogue, lacks talent. Not could be stronger if, or try revising this section, but flat, dismissive pronouncements. She didn't lower her voice. Writing isn't for everyone, Eliana. Find something realistic. 8 words. They slid off her tongue like she was commenting on the weather, but they hit me like a car accident in slow motion. I felt 26 pairs of eyes swivel towards me. Someone snorted quietly. Emma, my best friend since middle school, turned in her seat just enough to send me a look that said, "I'm so sorry," without saying anything at all. My face burned. The room seemed to tilt. I tried to laugh it off, but my mouth wouldn't work. I reached for the story, but she didn't let go right away, as if to make sure those words landed, as if she wanted them to sink into the floorboards and stay there for the next generation of terrified kids. "Some people are born storytellers," she continued, still looking at me. "Others should focus on more practical career paths. Have you considered business administration?" A few students shifted uncomfortably. One guy coughed. The fluorescent lights hummed in the silence that followed, too bright, too loud. I wanted the ground to open up and swallow me whole. Instead, I sat there, fingers numb, staring at the massacre of red across my pages. In that moment, it didn't feel like she was critiquing a story. It felt like she was closing a door. That night, I emptied my backpack onto my bed. 3 battered notebooks, all filled with stories and half-finished scenes and random lines of dialogue I was proud of once, tumbled out in a messy pile. The handwriting was frantic and hopeful. I didn't even reread them. I just sat on the edge of my bed with a trash bag and a hollow chest. One by one, I dropped them in. Every thud into the trash can sounded like a little funeral, for a girl who believed she could make people feel something with words, for the version of me who thought the world might ever want to hear her voice. My parents weren't surprised when I told them I was changing my college applications from English literature to communications. "Good," my father said from behind his evening paper. "Writing doesn't pay the bills anyway." My mother added, "You're smart. You'll do well in something stable, maybe marketing or PR." They weren't cruel. They were relieved. They had always thought my obsession with writing was a phase I clung to for too long, like an old toy I refused to outgrow. So when I told them I was giving it up, they interpreted the grief in my voice as maturity. For 2 years after that, anytime a story idea tried to surface, on the bus, during a lecture, in the shower, it ran straight into the brick wall of Mrs. Blackwood's voice. Writing isn't for everyone, Eliana. Find something realistic. I would open a blank document, stare at the blinking cursor, and feel foolish. Who was I kidding? If my own English teacher thought I had no talent, what made me believe some stranger out there would ever care about my words? So I poured all my energy into my communications major. I learned about media theory, campaign strategies, and demographic analysis. I wrote press releases and case studies instead of short stories. I got good grades, praise from professors, internships that made my parents proud. On the surface, I was doing everything right. Inside, something shrank a little more every semester. Then, in my sophomore year, I enrolled in communications ethics, a required course I didn't expect to care about. The professor, Dr. Winters, was a woman in her late 40s with kind eyes and a sharp, precise way of speaking that made everyone sit up straighter. Our first big assignment was a personal essay about how media had shaped our understanding of the world. Make it honest, she said, pacing at the front of the room. I don't want buzzwords. I want your real experiences. How has media told you who you are, or who you can't be? Her words caught on something raw inside me. I wrote about growing up in rural Montana, about the way small towns are either romanticized as simple and pure, or mocked as backwards cliches in movies and TV shows. I wrote about how those narratives seeped in, how I used to scribble alternative stories in the margins of my homework just to imagine a version of my town that wasn't laughable or tragic. I wrote about Mrs. Blackwood, too. Not by name, but in the shape of a teacher who told a teenager her voice wasn't worth listening to. When I turned it in, I felt exposed. It was the first honest piece of writing I'd done in years, and I half expected to get it back covered in the same brutal red ink. After class, Dr. Winters asked me to stay behind. My stomach dropped. My palms got damp. I braced myself for the familiar humiliation. She sat on the edge of her desk, my essay in her hands, pages bent from being read more than once. Eliana, she said slowly, this is exceptional work. I blinked. What? The structure, the insight, the way you wove personal experience with broader media patterns. This is not just good. This is publishable with revision. She tilted her head. Have you ever considered switching to journalism or even creative writing? A laugh escaped me, bitter and sharp. My high school teacher told me I had no talent. She said writing wasn't for me. Something flickered in Dr. Winters' eyes. Not pity, anger. High school teachers, she said, choosing her words carefully, are not always right. Some of the best writers I know were told they couldn't write. Rejection and criticism are part of the process, not the end of it. She handed me a flyer for the university's literary magazine. Submit something, she said. Worst case, they reject you and you're exactly where you are now. Best case, you discover that your teacher was dead wrong. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the flyer on my nightstand like a dare. The part of me I'd tried to bury sat up and whispered, what if? I spent the next month crafting a short story about a teacher who crushes her students' dreams. It wasn't a memoir, but anyone who had ever sat in that fluorescent lit classroom would recognize her. I called it Red Ink. I didn't just send it to the university magazine. On a sleepless impulse, I submitted it to a regional publication and a national contest for emerging writers, too. My finger hovered over the mouse before I clicked Submit, my heart hammering. Mrs. Blackwood's voice tried to stop me one more time. Writing isn't for everyone, Eliana. I clicked anyway. Everything moved faster than I expected after I clicked Submit. It was like I had opened a tiny door I didn't realize was a gateway. 2 weeks passed with no news, and I convinced myself the silence was the rejection. The familiar voice returned, Mrs. Blackwood's, slicing through my optimism like a cold blade. I tried to push it out of my head, but every time I refreshed my email, my heart sank a little lower. And then one morning, while I was pouring cereal in the quiet kitchen of my dorm apartment, my phone buzzed. An email notification. Subject line, congratulations, Red Ink accepted. I froze, bowl in hand. For a second, I genuinely thought it was spam, but when I opened it, the words blurred because my eyes filled too fast. The regional magazine wanted to publish my story in their summer issue. They called it bold, memorable, fearless. I had to sit down on the kitchen floor, legs shaking, cereal forgotten, because it felt like someone had finally cracked open a window in the airless room I'd been living in for years. I didn't even have time to process it before, 3 days later, a second notification came. The national contest, second place, prize, $2,000. I covered my mouth to stifle the sob that broke out of me, not because I won money, but because someone who didn't know me, didn't know my past, didn't know the humiliation I'd buried, had looked at my story and said, "This has value." I wanted to tell someone, to share the joy with a person who would understand it. But Emma was studying abroad, my parents wouldn't have cared, and the last person I thought of was ironically the one who had created the wound in the first place. I didn't tell anyone, not yet. A week later, everything changed again. I opened my laptop after class to find an email from an unfamiliar address. Francine Rousseau, literary agent. My pulse flipped. "I read Red Ink online," she wrote. "Your voice is strong. Do you have more material? I'd love to discuss representation." For 10 minutes, I didn't breathe. The next 6 months were a blur of drafting, revising, late-night calls with Francine, and moments of pure disbelief. My debut collection, Voices They Tried to Silence, sold to Meridian Press. I held the contract in trembling hands, feeling the world tilt in a way that felt both terrifying and right. When my book released 18 months later, the acknowledgments page thanked the teachers who told students they couldn't write. My parents started introducing me as our daughter, the author. Bookstores stocked my collection. Social media posts about Red Ink multiplied. Speaking invitations trickled in. My launch week sales hit numbers I had never dared imagine. But success didn't silence the echo in my mind. Writing isn't for everyone, Eliana. The first time I saw my book on a shelf, I knew exactly what I had to do. I bought the most expensive hardcover edition, the one with the glossy dust jacket and my author photo on the back. I signed it with a message that wasn't cruel, but wasn't gentle either. It was the kind of truth Mrs. Blackwood had never offered me. "Dear Mrs. Blackwood, thank you for showing me that sometimes the best motivation comes from proving someone wrong." I mailed it directly to her classroom with delivery confirmation. And then I waited. 2 weeks later, an unknown number with my hometown area code flashed across my screen. I knew who it was before I answered. "Is this Eliana Chen Ward?" Her voice was tight, clipped, like she was holding her composure together with straight pins. "Yes, this is Eliana." "This is Beverly Blackwood. I received your package." My heart kicked hard. "Hello, Mrs. Blackwood. Did you read any of it?" A sharp pause. "I read enough." Her tone simmered. "Your little stunt was highly inappropriate. Sending something like that to my workplace? That was childish and vindictive." "I was sharing my work with a teacher who took such interest in my writing abilities," I said sweetly. "Isn't that what students are supposed to do? Let their teachers know how they turned out?" "Don't play games with me." Her voice cracked like glass under pressure. "I know what this is about." "What is it about?" Another pause, longer this time. "You're trying to embarrass me." I stayed silent, letting her talk. "Well, congratulations," she continued. "Some of my colleagues saw your book. They had questions." "What kind of questions?" My voice was calm, too calm. "They wanted to know if the teacher in your title story was based on someone real, if I had said certain things to a student." My chest tightened. "And what did you tell them?" "That it was fiction, creative writing, just like everything else you've ever done." The venom in her tone wasn't surprising. The fear in it was. She was scared. For the first time ever, she was the one being judged. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, something unexpected stirred. A mixture of satisfaction, yes, but also something heavier, something that didn't feel like victory at all. Before I could respond, she added, "One book doesn't make you a real writer." I almost laughed. Almost. "Actually, Mrs. Blackwood, that's exactly what it makes me." Silence. Then the line clicked, and she hung up. I sat there holding my phone, heart pounding, adrenaline flooding my veins. I waited for the rush of triumph I had spent years fantasizing about. But it didn't come, not the way I expected. 3 days later, an email arrived. From a girl named Kendra Walsh, a senior at Millfield High, one of Mrs. Blackwood's current students. And with one message, everything changed again. Kendra's email wasn't long, but it hit like a punch straight to the ribs. "Dear Miss Ward," it began. "I hope it's okay that I'm writing to you. I'm in Mrs. Blackwood's AP English class, and after your book started circulating online, a few of us bought copies. I just wanted you to know that your story, Red Ink, it feels exactly like being in her class." My breath caught. She described how, just a month earlier, Mrs. Blackwood told her she should focus on STEM subjects because her essay writing wasn't strong enough for college English. She wrote about feeling humiliated, about crying in the bathroom between classes, about almost deleting all the short stories she'd been writing secretly for years. Then she said something that made my chest tighten painfully. "Reading your book made me believe I shouldn't give up yet. Thank you for making me feel like my voice matters." I read the email 3 times before I responded. Please don't let one person determine your future as a writer, I wrote. I would be happy to read your work and give you feedback. She sent me her stories that same night, raw, unpolished, but full of heart. I felt protective of her instantly, the way I had once wished someone felt protective of me. But the email did more than tug at old wounds. It snapped something awake inside me. This wasn't just about my humiliation anymore. There were students right now, kids, experiencing the same quiet destruction I had. And I couldn't ignore that. I posted a careful message on social media. Did anyone else have Mrs. Blackwood as a teacher? I'm collecting experiences. Within hours, my inbox filled. Emma messaged me from abroad. She told me my poetry wasn't serious writing. I stopped submitting to contests. David, now a journalist at a small local paper, she told me my voice was too informal for professional writing. I almost changed majors. Alexis, who became a grant writer, she told me creative nonfiction was self-indulgent. I stopped writing for fun. The pattern was unmistakable. The shock turned to anger, and the anger turned into resolve. I scheduled a meeting with the superintendent of Millfield School District, Dr. Patricia Valdez. I introduced myself not as the girl who'd been crushed at 18, but as a published author and former student with concerns. When I entered her office on Tuesday morning, Dr. Valdez greeted me warmly. Her desk was organized, her tone calm but alert, like she already sensed this would be a complicated conversation. How can I help you, Ms. Ward? I told her everything, professionally, calmly, no dramatics, no embellishments, just facts. I laid out testimonial emails with names redacted, printed copies of my book reviews, sales data, a copy of red ink. I watched her face shift from polite attentiveness to concern, to unease. Mrs. Blackwood has been teaching here for over 30 years, she said. We've had some complaints in the past. She paused. But nothing formally documented? Nothing documented. That was always the problem. Students left, moved on, healed, or didn't, but no one ever circled back. What you're describing, Dr. Valdez continued slowly, goes beyond strict instruction. It's systematic discouragement, I said softly. She's not preparing students for reality. She's preventing them from even trying. She exhaled. I'll begin a preliminary investigation. I'll need contact information for a current student if possible. Kendra agreed immediately when I asked. She said yes so quickly it broke my heart a little. 2 weeks later, Dr. Valdez called. I've interviewed several of Mrs. Blackwood's current and former students, Faye, she said. What you described is exactly what we found. There was a long pause. Her teaching methods are problematic. While we can't dismiss her for this alone, she is being required to attend creative feedback workshops and work with our curriculum coordinator to revise her instruction style. It wasn't the explosive reckoning I had once fantasized about, but it was something real, a shift, an acknowledgement, a consequence. Still, when I hung up the phone, I couldn't shake the heaviness pressing on my ribs. I opened my laptop, staring at the blank screen. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt hollow. 3 days later, Kendra wrote again. You won't believe what happened today. Mrs. Blackwood didn't tear apart our stories. She actually gave me positive feedback. She told me I should consider submitting to the school literary magazine. I didn't know how to respond at first. It felt unreal. But weeks went by, and Kendra kept updating me. She's different now, she wrote. She's strict, but she's not cruel. She told Marcus his imagery was promising. She suggested Devin revise her ending, but she didn't make her feel stupid. Students who once feared her now cautiously leaned in when she spoke. Some even liked her class. That should have been the end of the story. But it wasn't, because that spring I received an invitation to speak at a writers' conference in Denver. The session title, Overcoming Educational Barriers to Creative Careers. And as I prepared my notes, something unexpected happened. I thought about Mrs. Blackwood, not with anger, but with curiosity. Not about who she had been, but about who she was becoming. On an impulse I couldn't fully explain, I wrote her a letter. Not sarcastic, not triumphant, not vengeful. An invitation. Dear Mrs. Blackwood, I'll be speaking at the Mountain West Writers Conference next month about the impact educators have on aspiring writers. I would like to offer you the opportunity to share your perspective as well. I sealed the envelope, mailed it, and immediately questioned my sanity. Why reach out to the person who wrecked me? Why reopen a door I finally closed? I didn't know, not fully. But something told me this story wasn't done yet, and whatever came next would change everything. 3 days later, my phone rang. Her voice, cautious and unexpectedly soft, said, Is the offer still open? When I arrived in Denver for the conference, I wasn't thinking about the people, or the stage, or even the talk I'd already rehearsed 23 times in the mirror. I was thinking about her. Mrs. Beverly Blackwood. What would she look like after all these years? Would she come armed with defensiveness? With guilt? With denial? Or something worse, indifference? She was the last person I expected to see sitting alone at the corner table of the conference lounge when I walked in that Friday afternoon. She wore a charcoal gray blazer, the kind teachers favor for parent-teacher night, and she looked smaller than I remembered, less sharp, more human. Her hands were wrapped around a coffee cup like it was the only warm thing in the room. Our eyes met. She stood too fast, almost knocking her chair back. Eliana. Mrs. Blackwood. A beat of silence. A decade of buried emotions pressed between us like a wall made of old red ink. I didn't expect you this early, she said, smoothing her jacket with shaky hands. I wasn't sure you'd actually come. I almost didn't, she swallowed. But your letter. You asked for my perspective. Nobody's ever asked for that. Her voice cracked on the last word. We sat. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was thick, pulsing with everything unspoken. She cleared her throat. I've been thinking about what I said to you all those years ago. I shouldn't have said those things. I know that now. It wasn't an apology yet, but it was the closest she'd ever come. What changed? I asked quietly. She let out a small, humorless laugh. You did. She looked down at her hands. And my students recently, and your book. That story, red ink. It was painful to read, because it was true. The confession hit harder than any insult ever had. Why? I asked before I could stop myself. Why did you say those things to me, to Kendra, to everyone? Her jaw tightened. She stared into her coffee as though answers floated there, then softly. Because I failed. I blinked. What do you mean? She exhaled, and it sounded like letting out 20 years of breath she'd held too long. I wanted to be a writer once. I sent out stories for years. I collected rejection letters like unpaid bills. Eventually, I just stopped trying. Her voice dropped. I told myself I was being realistic, practical. But that wasn't true. I was protecting myself from more disappointment by convincing my students that disappointment was inevitable. Something twisted inside me. Not sympathy, but recognition. The older version of me, the one who threw away her notebooks in a trash bag, understood that particular brand of self-betrayal. She continued quietly. When I saw your name on that book, your success, it made me realize something awful. She paused. I wasn't protecting students. I was taking my failure and spreading it like a disease. I leaned back, stunned by the honesty. Before I could respond, she looked up at me with tear-glazed eyes. You deserve better from me, Eliana. The apology, when it finally came, was disarming in its simplicity. I'm sorry. A lump rose in my throat. I wasn't prepared for this kind of honesty. I had imagined confrontation, maybe even a fight, but not this. We can't change the past, I said slowly. But maybe we can do something with it. She nodded, wiping her eyes discreetly. The next day, our presentation was scheduled for 2:00 p.m. in one of the larger ballrooms. The room filled quickly. Teachers, writers, administrators, even a few publishing professionals, curious to see the unlikely pairing on the program. When I stepped onto the stage and the lights hit me, my nerves evaporated. I talked about the impact of discouragement, the invisible scars left by a single voice of authority. I shared parts of my journey, from humiliation in high school to the internal battle that nearly kept me from writing again. Then I said it. I'm not the only one on this stage with something to say. I turned to her. Mrs. Beverly Blackwood will share her perspective. She stood slowly, like someone carrying a weight heavier than the audience could see. She approached the microphone, hands trembling. The room went utterly still. I used to believe I was helping students by being brutally honest, she began. But I see now that I wasn't honest at all. I was afraid. She glanced at me, afraid that if they succeeded, it meant I had truly failed. A collective exhale swept the room. She continued, My job was never to predict which students would become writers. My job was to help them develop the courage to try. A teacher in the front row quietly wiped a tear. Another raised her hand. How do you balance encouragement with realism? Mrs. Blackwood didn't flinch this time. You don't discourage kids to protect them. You teach them resilience so they can face rejection with strength. You teach them that improvement is possible, that talent can grow. Her voice grew stronger, steadier, truer. For years, I crushed stories before they could grow. I can't undo that, but I can choose differently now. By the time she finished, the entire ballroom was on their feet. A standing ovation. Not for me. For her. When she returned to her seat beside me, Her eyes were red but shining. That was brave, I whispered. So was inviting me. We walked off the stage together, the applause still echoing. And I knew, in that moment, the story was no longer about revenge. It was about transformation, hers, and maybe mine too. After the conference, educators lined up to speak with us. Some wanted advice. Others admitted they'd made the same mistakes she had. A curriculum developer approached with an offer to help us create a national training module. By the time we left the building, evening shadows stretched long across the pavement, and the sky glowed orange and purple. As we stepped outside, she stopped and looked at me. "Can I tell you something?" "Of course." "You saved me," she said softly. "You saved the part of me I gave up on. Thank you." I shook my head, overwhelmed. "No, you saved yourself. I just held up the mirror." She smiled, a real smile, not the tight, controlled ones I remembered. And for the first time since I was 17, I felt something unfamiliar when I looked at her. Peace. After the conference, everything began to move in a direction neither of us could have predicted. The applause faded, the ballroom emptied, and the world outside returned to its ordinary pace. But something between us had shifted permanently. The next few months became a strange, beautiful routine of emails, phone calls, and shared documents. We weren't just former student and teacher anymore. We weren't adversaries. We were something closer to unlikely partners, stitched together by a wound we both finally acknowledged. It started with small steps. I'd send her articles about creative pedagogy. She'd send me screenshots of her newly revised assignments, tentatively asking, "Is this too lenient?" I'd laugh and point out that encouraging a student to revise wasn't leniency, it was actual teaching. She was learning. I was learning. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, something larger began to take shape. 2 years after Denver, we presented together at the National Education Association Symposium. 3 years after that, our first co-authored training program launched in a pilot across 12 states. But the most unexpected turning point came in the spring of the 4th year, when she called me one evening, her voice trembling with something I couldn't quite name. "Eliana," she said softly, "I have news." "What happened?" I asked, instantly alert. "I got accepted." "Accepted to what?" She swallowed audibly. "The Vermont College of Fine Arts, MFA in Creative Writing." I sat frozen, the room around me dissolving. You applied?" I choked out. "I did, quietly. I didn't think I'd get in, but I did." And then, something like a laugh escaped her, a small, shaky thing, but undeniably hopeful. "I want to write again," she whispered. "Not for approval, not for validation, for joy." My eyes stung. "You deserve that." She exhaled shakily. "I'm terrified." "That means it matters," I said. Her first semester was rough. In our calls, she confided how workshops made her feel like she was 17 again, uncertain, exposed, insecure. She hated reading her work aloud. She hated critique. She hated how her classmates seemed so effortlessly fluent in literary vocabulary she had forgotten over decades of grading high school essays. But she didn't quit. Instead, she wrote through the discomfort. She revised through tears. She practiced reading aloud in front of the mirror. She took every critique not as a wound, but a chance. And slowly, the breakthroughs began. One night she called me sobbing, with joy this time. "They accepted my story," she gasped. "A literary magazine accepted my story." "Which one?" I asked, barely breathing. "Hearth and Hollow." A small publication, but respected. A place that valued emotional honesty, character-driven narratives, and quiet complexity. A place perfect for her. "I'm proud of you," I whispered. And I meant it more than I had meant almost anything in my life. She graduated at 57. I flew to Vermont for the ceremony, sitting in the audience with several of her current and former students. When her name was called and she walked across the stage in her cap and gown, the auditorium erupted. Her classmates cheered loudest. Her advisor hugged her like family. She held her diploma like it was a fragile miracle. Later at the reception, she pressed a bound manuscript into my hands. "My thesis," she said, "linked stories about teachers and students, and the damage we do when we believe failure is contagious." I opened it, saw the dedication, and nearly lost my composure. To Eliana for refusing to stay silent. Her return to Millfield High after earning her MFA was transformational. She revamped the entire creative writing curriculum. She trained other teachers on feedback that nurtured instead of destroys. She created a safe haven for student voices, a classroom where kids who once whispered their ideas now spoke with confidence. Her students adored her. The girl who once cut people down with red ink now carried stacks of sticky notes praising effective imagery, bold choices, and emotional depth. She assigned revision workshops instead of humiliation sessions. She taught not to fear failure, but to expect it and grow from it. And the ripple effect was enormous. Publication rates for Millfield students skyrocketed. The school literary magazine expanded from a 6-page booklet to a 100-page anthology. The district asked her to lead annual training sessions. Teachers across the state came to observe her classes. The woman who once dismantled dreams had become a builder of them. Meanwhile, I kept writing. Book after book, fiction, essays, memoirs about creativity and resilience. My 4th book was a deeply personal exploration of mentorship, trauma, and redemption. I dedicated it simply, for Beverly. The book did well, but more than the sales, the reviews, the interviews, the impact mattered. Teachers wrote to me, saying the book changed the way they approach student creativity. Parents wrote about seeing their children bloom. Students wrote about having teachers who finally encouraged them. One letter stopped me cold. It arrived anonymously in a plain envelope. No return address, just a single sheet inside. Mrs. Blackwood once told me my writing was worthless. I believed her for years. But today, I'm teaching my daughter to love stories again. We both thank you. I showed it to her the next time we met for coffee. She read it twice, tears slipping onto the paper. I can't fix the past, she whispered, but maybe I can soften it. You already have, I said. 5 years to the day after she sat with me in Denver, we were invited to give the keynote address at the International Conference on Creative Education. 2,000 educators filled the hall. I spoke first, sharing my journey, my wound, my healing. Then she stepped to the microphone and said something I will never forget. I told a 17-year-old girl she would never be a writer. Today I'm standing beside her, thanking her for becoming one. The audience rose as one. Not for me, not for her, for the miracle of change. Mrs. Blackwood retired at 62. Her farewell party filled the school gym. Former students sent video messages from around the world. Some were writers, some weren't, but all of them said the same thing. She made me believe I could. After retirement, she published her first novel, The Classroom. It wasn't a bestseller. It didn't need to be. It was honest, tender, luminous. A story only she could have written. She mailed me the first copy. Inside the cover, she wrote a final note. Eliana, you were right. It is never too late to begin again. Thank you for giving me back the dream I abandoned. I look back now and see the astonishing truth. This story was never about revenge. It was about resurrection, of a dream, of a voice, of a teacher lost to her own failures. And the greatest plot twist of my life is this. The woman who told me I'd never be a writer became one because of me. We healed each other. We changed each other. We changed countless students. The victory wasn't proving her wrong. It was helping her become right.